The air in Tel Aviv was thick with dust and the acrid tang of smoke, a grim reminder of the Iran-Israel conflict that had scarred the city in the spring of 2025. The once bustling streets near Ichilov Hospital were now a maze of rubble, shattered glass glinting under a June sun that beat down on volunteers clearing debris. Sirens had faded, replaced by the clatter of shovels and the low hum of portable generators powering triage tents. Amid the chaos, Dr. Aisha Carter, a 38-year-old black medic from Chicago, moved with quiet precision through a makeshift clinic, her navy scrub streaked with ash, her braided hair tucked under a cap. Her dark eyes scanned patient charts, her hands steady as she bandaged a child's arm, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. Aisha was a trauma surgeon, a volunteer with the American Red Cross, here to aid civilians caught in the war's aftermath, but her presence drew stares, some grateful, some hostile, from her international team. Aisha had joined the mission after Iran's missile strikes and Israel's retaliatory nuclear response left Tel Aviv reeling, hospitals overwhelmed, and thousands displaced. She'd seen war zones before, Haiti, Syria, but this was different, the scale of destruction a gut punch. Her team, a mix of medics from the US, Europe, and Israel, worked under Dr. Eitan Levy, a gruff Israeli surgeon who valued results over chatter. But not all her teammates shared his focus. A clique led by Mark Brennan, a white American paramedic with a chip on his shoulder, whispered about Aisha, their glances sharp, their words laced with doubt. She's out of her depth, why is she even here? Aisha caught their murmurs, her jaw tightening, but she kept working, her Chicago grit stronger than their bias. In the clinic, a canvas tent buzzing with the beep of monitors and the cries of the injured, Aisha checked a patient's her hands deft despite the heat. Outside, volunteers hauled debris, their shouts mixing with the distant rumble of bulldozers. Brennan, leaning against a crate of supplies, muttered to his buddy, a British medic named Tom, his voice low but not low enough. "She's slowing us down," he said, nodding at Aisha, his sandy hair catching the sun. "Probably got in through some quota." Tom snickered, but Dr. Levy, passing by, shot them a look, his voice a growl. "Focus, Brennan. We've got lives to save." Aisha's eyes flicked up, catching Brennan's glare, but she kept her cool, her focus on a young girl with a shrapnel wound, her bedside manner a bomb. Across the tent, a local nurse, Miriam, watched Aisha work, her eyes warm with respect, her Hebrew accent soft as she handed Aisha a bandage. "You're good with them," she said, nodding at the girl, who smiled weakly under Aisha's care. Aisha nodded, her voice low. "Just doing my job." But she felt the weight, Brennan's crew, their whispers, the way they'd forgotten to include her in briefings, the way supplies always seemed short when she needed them. She'd faced this before, in Chicago ERs, in med school, but here, in a war-torn city, it stung deeper, the stakes higher. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows over the rubble, Brennan's voice cut through the tent, loud and deliberate. "Hey, Carter, you sure you're up for this?" he said, holding a trauma kit, his smirk sharp. "This ain't a Chicago clinic. Don't mess up." The tent hushed, medics glancing up, Miriam's eyes narrowing, Dr. Levy pausing mid-chart. Aisha's hands stilled, her breath steady, her voice calm but steel-edged. "I've got this, Brennan," she said, her eyes locked on his, her scrubs a badge of her skill. The tent's hum returned, but the tension lingered, a spark in a city of ruins, and Aisha knew this was just the start of a fight she'd win with more than bandages. "All right, let's jump back into the sweltering chaos of Tel Aviv's Ichilov Hospital, where the dust of a war-torn city mixes with the sharp sting of antiseptic in a makeshift clinic tent." It's June 2025, and the scars of the Iran-Israel conflict, missile strikes, nuclear fallout, linger in the rubble-strewn streets outside. Dr. Aisha Carter, a 38-year-old black trauma surgeon from Chicago, moves with steady precision, her navy scrub streaked with ash, her braided hair tucked under a cap, her dark eyes focused on a patient's chart. She's a volunteer with the American Red Cross, here to save lives amid the aftermath, but her presence draws sharp glances from her team, some grateful, some cutting. Mark Brennan, a white American paramedic with a smirk and a chip on his shoulder, leads a clique that's made Aisha their target. Their whispers, "She's out of her depth," a constant jab. Brennan's latest taunt, questioning her skills in front of the tent, still hangs in the air, met by Aisha's cool reply, "I've got this." The clinic's hum, beeping monitors, crying patients, clattering supplies, masks a deeper tension, and outside, the cicadas and bulldozers drone on, unaware of the storm brewing inside. Aisha adjusted and drip, her hands steady as she soothed the teenage boy with a bandaged leg, his eyes wide with pain but softening under her calm. "You're gonna be fine," she said, her Chicago accent a quiet anchor, her smile a lifeline in the chaos. The tent was a pressure cooker, medics darting between cots, the air thick with heat and the metallic tang of blood. Dr. Eitan Levy, the grizzled Israeli surgeon in charge, barked orders nearby, his focus on a critical case, his respect for Aisha clear but unspoken. Miriam, the local nurse, handed her a syringe, her Hebrew accent warm. "You're a natural," Miriam said, her eyes flicking to Brennan, who lounged by a supply crate, his sandy hair catching the flickering generator lights, his smirk sharp as he muttered to his buddy, Tom, a British medic. "She's gonna screw up soon," Brennan said, loud enough for Aisha to hear, his voice dripping with disdain. "This ain't her scene." Aisha's jaw tightened, but she kept her focus on the boy, checking his pulse, her years in Chicago's toughest ERs steeling her against the barbs. She'd faced worse, med school professors who doubted her, hospital admins who sidelined her, but here, in a war zone, Brennan's words stung deeper, each one a challenge to her right to be here. Tom snickered, tossing a bandage roll between his hands, his voice low. "Bet she got this gig through some diversity push." The tense hum dipped, a few medics glancing up, some uneasy, others ignoring the jab. Miriam's eyes narrowed, her hands pausing, but Aisha shook her head slightly, signaling her to stay out of it, her focus unbroken. Brennan stood, his paramedic vest loose, his voice louder now, a performance for the tent. "Hey, Carter," he called, stepping closer, his smirk wider, his trauma kit slung over his shoulder. "You sure you know what you're doing with that for? Don't want you hurting nobody out here." The boy on the cot flinched, his eyes darting to Aisha, but she smiled, her voice steady. "I've got it, kid," she said, finishing the four, her hands deft, her calm a shield. She turned to Brennan, her eyes locking on his, her voice low, cutting. "Worry about your own patients, Mark. I'm not the one dropping bandages." The tent murmured, a few medics stifling laughs, Miriam's lips twitching, Dr. Levy's head snapping up, his gruff voice cutting in. "Brennan, move it. We've got a dozen more coming in." But Brennan's smirk didn't fade, his eyes narrowing, his voice a hiss. "You think you're hot stuff, huh?" he said, tossing the bandage roll to Tom, who caught it, grinning. "Let's see how long you last when things get real." He turned away, but his words lingered, a challenge Aisha felt in her bones. She'd saved lives under gunfire, stitched wounds in blackouts, but Brennan's crew saw only her skin, not her skill. Outside, the bulldozers roared, clearing debris from a bombed-out street, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows through the tent's canvas flaps. A new patient was wheeled in, an elderly man with shrapnel wounds, his breathing shallow, his chart a mess of urgent notes. Aisha took it, her eyes scanning, her mind shifting gears, but Brennan's voice cut through again, this time to the team. "Let's not let Carter botch this one," he said, loud enough for the tent to hear, his smirk a taunt. The elderly man's eyes flicked to Aisha, uncertain, and her heart clenched, but her hands stayed steady, her voice calm. "You're in good hands," she told him, prepping a suture kit, her focus ironclad. Miriam stepped closer, her voice low, angry. "He's out of line," she whispered, handing Aisha a scalpel, her eyes on Brennan, who was now joking with Tom by the supply crates. "You don't deserve this." Aisha nodded, her voice quiet. "I'm used to it," she said, her hands moving over the patient, her skill a quiet rebuke. But the tense tension was palpable, medics whispering, some siding with Brennan, others with Aisha, the divide clear. Dr. Levy, catching the exchange, stormed over, his voice a growl. "Brennan, Tom, cut the crap and get to work." He barked, his eyes flicking to Aisha, a nod of respect she caught but didn't acknowledge, her focus on the patient. The tense flap burst open, a Red Cross coordinator, Rachel, rushing in, her clipboard shaking, her voice urgent. "We've got a collapse in Sector 3, she said, her eyes wide. "Buildings unstable, patients trapped. We need medics now." Dr. Levy turned, his voice sharp. "Carter, Brennan, Tom, you're on it. Move." Aisha grabbed her trauma bag, her scrubs tight with sweat, her eyes meeting Brennan's, his smirk faltering for a split second. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady, her Chicago grit kicking in. Tom hesitated, but Brennan nodded, his voice low, mocking. "Hope you can keep up, Carter," he said, slinging his kit, leading the way. The team sprinted toward Sector 3, the rubble-strewn street a maze of danger, the air thick with dust and the distant wail of sirens. Aisha's heart pounded, her training overriding Brennan's taunts, her mind on the trapped patients. But Brennan's crew lagged, their whispers sharp, "She'll choke, not cut out for this," their doubt a weight she carried with every step. Miriam, staying behind, watched her go, her voice a whisper. "Prove em wrong, Aisha." The sun sank, the rubble loomed, and Aisha's scrubs were a beacon in the chaos, her skill a truth Brennan couldn't see, ready to save lives and rewrite his narrative. Let's plunge back into the gritty chaos of Tel Aviv's Sector 3, where the June 2025 sun has sunk, leaving a bruised sky over the rubble-strewn streets scarred by the Iran-Israel conflict. The air's thick with dust and the sharp bite of smoke, the distant wail of sirens blending with the rumble of bulldozers clearing debris from the war's aftermath, missile strikes from Iran, nuclear retaliation from Israel. In a makeshift clinic tent near Ichilov Hospital, Dr. Aisha Carter, a 38-year-old black trauma surgeon from Chicago, is sprinting toward a collapsed building, her navy scrub streaked with ash, her braided hair tucked under a cap, her trauma bag slung over her shoulder. She's part of an American Red Cross team led by Dr. Eitan Levy, but her teammate, Mark Brennan, a white American paramedic with a smirk and a chip on his shoulder, has made her a target, his taunts, "She'll choke," echoing as they race to rescue trapped patients. Brennan's buddy, Tom, a British medic, trails behind, his snickers fading under the weight of the mission. Aisha's calm, forged in Chicago's toughest ERs, holds firm, her dark eyes locked on the task, her skill a quiet rebuke to their bias. Back at the tent, Nurse Miriam watches, her whisper, "Prove em wrong, Aisha," a spark in the night, and the stakes are life or death as Aisha's about to show Brennan who's really out of their depth. The collapsed building loomed, a jagged heap of concrete and rebar where an apartment block once stood, its twisted remains glowing faintly under emergency floodlights. Shouts of trapped civilians pierced the dusk, their voices muffled by debris, the air heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid sting of charred metal. Aisha's boots crunched on shattered glass, her trauma bag bouncing, her breath steady despite her pounding heart. Brennan, ahead, barked orders to Tom, his paramedic vest flapping, his sandy hair matted with sweat, his voice sharp. "Move it, Tom. We've got to stabilize before it shifts." He shot a glance at Aisha, his smirk twisting, his tone biting. "Carter, don't slow us down. Stay back if you can't handle this." Aisha's eyes narrowed, her voice low, cutting through the chaos. "I'm right here, Brennan," she said, her Chicago grit a steel thread, her hands already unzipping her bag, pulling out a triage kit. "Focus on the patients, not me." Tom hesitated, his bandage roll tucked away, his snicker gone, his eyes flicking to the rubble, the urgency overriding his usual jab. Dr. Levy, catching up, his gray hair wild under his cap, roared, "Enough chatter. Carter, Brennan, Tom, first floor, now." His Israeli accent was a command, his respect for Aisha clear in his glance, but Brennan's smirk lingered, his doubt a shadow trailing her. They ducked under a collapsed beam, the air choking with dust, the floodlights casting eerie shadows. A woman's cry echoed from a pocket of debris, her voice weak but urgent, a child's whimper beside her. Aisha's training kicked in, her hands steady as she scanned the scene, her mind mapping the risks: unstable rebar, gas leaks, aftershocks. She knelt by a crack in the rubble, her flashlight sweeping, spotting a woman's arm, bloodied but moving. "Hang on, we're here," Aisha called, her voice a beacon, her hands probing for a way in. Brennan, nearby, fumbled with his kit, his voice sharp. "Carter, you're in the way. Let me handle this." He pushed past, his elbow grazing her, his smirk a challenge, but Aisha held her ground, her voice calm. "You're not calling the shots here, Mark. We work together." Tom, crouching nearby, hesitated, his eyes on Aisha, his earlier snark fading. "She's right," he muttered, surprising himself, his British accent soft. "We need her hands." Brennan's face reddened, his voice a snarl. "She'll mess this up, Tom. Stay focused." But the woman's cry grew louder, the child's whimper sharper, and Aisha ignored him, her hands moving, her voice steady. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Carter, we're getting you out," she said, slipping a brace under the rubble, stabilizing the woman's arm. Dr. Levy, climbing over debris, nodded at Aisha, his voice gruff. "Good work, Carter. Keep it steady." Brennan's smirk faltered, his hands shaking as he struggled with a splint, his bravado cracking under the pressure. The rubble shifted, a low groan echoing, dust raining down, and the team froze, the child's cry spiking. Aisha's heart raced, her training a lifeline, her voice a command. "Brennan, Tom, brace that beam," she said, pointing to a sagging support, her hands still on the woman. Brennan hesitated, his eyes wide, but Tom moved, his hands grabbing a plank, his voice urgent. "Mark, help me." Brennan snapped out of it, his paramedic instincts kicking in, his smirk gone as he braced the beam, sweat dripping. Aisha worked fast, her hands sliding a cervical collar onto the woman, her voice soothing. "You're doing great, stay with me." The child, a girl no older than 10, whimpered, her hand reaching through the rubble, and Aisha grasped it, her touch a promise. A shout came from outside, another collapse, a gas line hissing, the floodlights flickering. Dr. Levy's voice roared, "We've got minutes. Move." Aisha's mind raced, her hands steady, her voice calm as she freed the woman's arm, checking her pulse, her eyes scanning for the child. Brennan, struggling with the beam, snapped, "Carter, you're too slow." But his voice cracked, his hands slipping, and Aisha's calm held firm, her voice sharp. "Focus, Mark, or we lose them." Tom, now fully on board, nodded, his voice steady. "She's got this, Mark. Help her." Brennan's face twisted, his ego bruised, but the child's cry silenced him, his hands tightening on the beam. Aisha reached deeper, her flashlight catching the girl's face, pale but alive, her eyes locked on Aisha's. "I'm here, sweetheart," Aisha said, her hands clearing debris, her scrubs torn but her focus unbroken. She stabilized the girl's neck, her voice a lifeline. "We're getting you out." Dr. Levy joined her, his hands steady, his voice gruff. "Carter, your lead on this. Go." Brennan's eyes widened, his smirk gone, his voice a mutter. "Her. She's," but Levy's glare cut him off, his voice a growl. "She's saving lives, Brennan. Learn from her." The gas line's hiss grew louder, a spark flashing in the rubble, and Aisha's heart pounded, her hands moving faster, her voice steady. "Tom, get the stretcher, now," she said, her eyes on the girl, her hands freeing her legs. Tom sprinted, his earlier bias buried under urgency, his voice clear. "On it, Dr. Carter." Brennan, still bracing the beam, sweated, his hands shaking, his voice a whisper. "Don't screw this up, Carter." Aisha ignored him, her hands lifting the girl, her voice soothing as she passed her to Levy, who rushed her to a stretcher. The woman followed, her arm braced, her eyes on Aisha, whispering, "Thank you." The rubble groaned again, a rebar snapping, and Aisha shoved Brennan and Tom out of the way, her body shielding them as debris fell, her scrubs catching a gash. The team stumbled out, the woman and child safe, the tense medics rushing to take over. Dr. Levy clapped Aisha's shoulder, his voice rough but proud. "You're a damn hero, Carter." Brennan's face was pale, his smirk gone, his eyes on Aisha, a mix of shame and awe. Tom nodded, his voice low. "You saved them," he said, his British accent soft, his bias crumbling. Aisha's breath was ragged, her scrubs torn, but her eyes burned, her voice steady. "I'm not done yet," she said, turning back to the tent, ready to face Brennan's crew and a city that needed her. A Red Cross official, Dr. Rachel Cohen, approached, her clipboard shaking, her voice urgent. "Carter, you're getting a commendation," she said, her eyes on the rescued patients. "The hospital's talking about you." Aisha nodded, her hands still steady, her mind on the next patient, but Brennan's silence spoke louder, his bias exposed, his team's eyes on her, a shift brewing in Tel Aviv's ruins that'd soon reach beyond the rubble. Have you ever seen someone rise above hate to save the day? Share your story in the comments, I'm reading every one. Let's dive back into the rubble-strewn chaos of Tel Aviv's Sector 3, where the June 2025 night is thick with dust and the faint glow of floodlights illuminating the aftermath of the Iran-Israel conflict. The air hums with the distant roar of bulldozers and the sharp sting of antiseptic from a Red Cross clinic tent near Ichilov Hospital. Dr. Aisha Carter, a 38-year-old black trauma surgeon from Chicago, stands bloodied but unbowed, her navy scrubs torn from shielding her team during a daring rescue of a woman and child trapped in a collapsed building. Her braided hair is still tucked under a cap, her dark eyes blazing with resolve, her trauma bag slung over her shoulder as she faces Mark Brennan, the white American paramedic whose taunts, she'll choke, have been silenced by her heroics. Brennan's sandy hair is matted, his smirk gone, his paramedic vest sagging as he grapples with the truth, Aisha saved lives he couldn't. Tom, his British medic sidekick, stands humbled, his earlier bias buried under awe, while Dr. Eitan Levy, the grizzled Israeli team leader, claps Aisha's shoulder, his gruff praise, "You're a damn hero, Carter," echoing in the tent. Red Cross official Dr. Rachel Cohen promises Aisha a commendation, her clipboard shaking, but Aisha's focus is on the next patient, her Chicago grit a quiet fire. The cicadas hum, the rubble looms, and Brennan's crew is about to learn the full weight of underestimating Dr. Aisha Carter. Aisha wiped sweat from her brow, her hands steady as she handed the rescued child's chart to a nurse, her voice calm despite the gash on her arm. The tent buzzed with medics rushing between cots, the beep of monitors a frantic pulse, but the air had shifted. Brennan's crew, once whispering doubts, now watched her with reluctant respect. Brennan stood by a supply crate, his face pale, his hands fidgeting with a bandage roll, his earlier bravado a distant memory. Tom, nearby, adjusted his trauma kit, his British accent soft as he muttered to a teammate, "She's the real deal." Aisha caught his words, her eyes flicking to him, a nod of acknowledgement, but her focus returned to a new patient, a man with a crushed leg, his groans filling the tent. Dr. Levy, his gray hair wild under his cap, stormed over, his Israeli accent sharp as he addressed the team. "Carter's leading triage," he barked, his eyes sweeping from Aisha to Brennan, whose jaw tightened. "Anyone got a problem with that, speak now or get out." Brennan's mouth opened, but no words came, his eyes dropping to the floor, his smirk a ghost. Tom nodded, his voice low. "No problem, sir." The other medics, some American, some Israeli, murmured agreement, their glances at Aisha a mix of awe and shame. Miriam, the local nurse, handed Aisha a suture kit, her Hebrew accent warm. "You showed them," she whispered, her eyes shining. Aisha's lips curved, a faint smile, her voice quiet. "Just doing my job, Miriam." Dr. Cohen approached again, her clipboard now joined by a Red Cross report, her voice urgent but proud. "Carter, your actions saved that family," she said, her eyes on the rescued woman and child, now stable on cots. "I'm recommending you for the humanitarian medal." The board's already talking. Aisha's breath caught, her hands pausing on the suture kit, the weight of the honor sinking in. She nodded, her voice steady. "Thank you, ma'am, but there's more to do." Cohen's eyes softened, her voice firm. "You're a leader, Carter. Don't let anyone tell you different." She glanced at Brennan, her meaning clear, and walked away, her clipboard a testament to Aisha's skill. Brennan's face twitched, his hands clenching the bandage roll, his voice a low mutter to Tom. "She got lucky," he said, but his tone lacked conviction, his eyes avoiding Aisha's. Tom shook his head, his voice sharp. "Lucky? She saved our asses, Mark. You froze out there." The tent hushed, medics glancing over, Brennan's face reddening, his ego bruised. Aisha ignored him, her hands stitching the man's leg, her focus a laser, but her ears caught every word. She'd faced doubters before, med school, ERs, but here, in a war zone, Brennan's bias had endangered lives, and her rescue had exposed it. A new shout pierced the tent, a medic rushing in, his voice frantic. "Gas leak in Sector 3. Risk of explosion." The team froze, the beeping monitors louder now, the patient's groans a backdrop. Dr. Levy spun, his voice a roar. "Carter, Brennan, Tom, you're back out there. Secure the area." Aisha grabbed her trauma bag, her scrubs torn but her resolve ironclad, her eyes meeting Levy's, a silent agreement. Brennan hesitated, his hands shaking, his voice a croak. "Another collapse?" "We can't," but Aisha cut him off, her voice steady, commanding. "We can, and we will," she said, striding toward the tent flap, her cap tight, her bag ready. Tom followed, his earlier snark gone, his voice firm. "I'm with you, Dr. Carter." Brennan trailed, his vest sagging, his silence a confession. They sprinted into the rubble, the floodlights flickering, the hiss of the gas line a ticking bomb. Aisha's flashlight swept the debris, spotting a trapped volunteer, a young Israeli medic, his leg pinned under rebar, his face pale with fear. She knelt, her hands probing, her voice soothing. "Hold on, we've got you," she said, her Chicago accent a calm anchor. Brennan fumbled with his kit, his hands shaking, his voice a whisper. "This is too much," he muttered, but Aisha's glare silenced him, her voice sharp. "Get it together, Mark. Lives are on the line." Tom braced the rebar, his hands steady, his voice low. "She's right. Help or move." Brennan's face contorted, his ego crumbling, but he nodded, his hands moving to assist, his bias no match for the crisis. Aisha worked fast, her hand stabilizing the medic's leg, her voice a lifeline. "Stay with me," she told him, her flashlight catching his eyes, her skill a beacon in the dark. The gas hiss grew louder, a spark flashing nearby, and Aisha's heart pounded, her hand steady as she freed the medic, passing him to Tom. "Get him out," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. Brennan, now moving, helped lift the rebar, his hands shaking but following her lead, his earlier taunts buried under her command. The team stumbled back to the tent, the medic safe, the gas line secured by engineers rushing in. Dr. Levy met them, his eyes wide, his voice gruff. "Carter, you did it again," he said, his hand on her shoulder, his Israeli accent thick with pride. "You're running this show." Aisha nodded, her scrubs bloodied, her breath ragged, her eyes on Brennan, who stood silent, his face pale, his hands empty. Tom clapped her arm, his voice genuine. "You're a bloody hero, Dr. Carter," he said, his British accent warm. The tense medics cheered, their earlier doubts gone, their eyes on Aisha, a leader born in the rubble. Dr. Cohen returned, her clipboard now holding a formal commendation letter, her voice a proclamation. "Carter, "The Red Cross is awarding you the humanitarian medal," she said, her eyes shining. "Your work today saved lives, changed minds." She glanced at Brennan, her voice firm. "Some people need to learn what a hero looks like." Brennan's eyes dropped, his silence a surrender, his bias exposed to the team. Aisha's chest tightened, her voice steady. "This is for the patients, not me," she said, her hands still ready, her eyes on the tent, where more lives waited. The cicadas sang, the floodlights held, and Aisha's truth, a black medic's unbreakable skill, was a beacon Tel Aviv would never forget, ready to shine far beyond the ruins. Let's wrap up this electrifying tale in the rubble-strewn streets of Tel Aviv, where the June 2025 night has settled over the scars of the Iran-Israel conflict, and Dr. Aisha Carter, a 38-year-old black trauma surgeon from Chicago, stands as a beacon of resilience. Her navy scrubs are torn, her braided hair still tucked under a cap, but her dark eyes shine with unyielding resolve after leading a daring rescue in a collapsed building, saving a woman, a child, and a trapped medic while silencing the taunts of Mark Brennan, a biased American paramedic. Brennan's smirk is gone, his sandy hair matted, his ego crushed by Aisha's skill, while his teammate Tom, a British medic, has shifted from snark to respect. Dr. Eitan Levy, the grizzled Israeli team leader, and Nurse Miriam have championed Aisha, and Red Cross official Dr. Rachel Cohen has just promised her the humanitarian medal for her heroics. The clinic tent hums with the beep of monitors, the air thick with dust and hope, and Aisha's focus remains on the patients, her Chicago grit of fire that's changed the team. The cicadas sing, the floodlights hold, and Aisha's story is about to ripple far beyond Tel Aviv, not through viral videos or hashtags, but through the raw power of community voices and ink on paper. Back in the tent, as medics stabilize the rescued patients, Aisha bandages her own gash, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crash, her voice calm as she updates a chart. Miriam, her eyes warm, hands her a water bottle, her Hebrew accent soft. "You're a gift, Aisha," she says, her smile a quiet salute. Aisha nods, her voice low, "Just doing what I came for." But the tense energy has shifted, medics who once whispered doubts now nod in respect, their eyes on her, a leader forged in crisis. Brennan, slumped by a supply crate, avoids her gaze, his paramedic vest sagging, his silence a confession. Tom, now a convert, approaches, his British accent earnest. "I was wrong about you, Dr. Carter," he says, his hand extended. "You're the best of us." Aisha shakes his hand, her smile faint but real, her voice steady. "Prove it by helping the next patient." By week's end, Aisha's actions are the talk of Tel Aviv's aid community, not on social media but in hushed conversations at triage stations, refugee camps, and synagogues. Dr. Cohen presents her with the humanitarian medal at a Red Cross ceremony, the gold glinting under floodlights, her citation praising unwavering courage under fire. The New York Times picks up the story, its headline, "Black Medics' Heroics in Tel Aviv Redefine Resilience," detailing Aisha's rescues, her defiance of bias, and her call for inclusive aid work, quoted in medical journals like The Lancet. Readers flood the Times with letters, sharing their own stories of overcoming prejudice, turning Aisha's stand into a beacon for global health workers. Brennan's reckoning is quiet but profound. Dr. Levy reassigns him to logistics, his paramedic duties suspended pending a bias review, his once loud voice now a whisper. He writes Aisha an apology letter, his handwriting shaky, read aloud at a team debrief, his shame a lesson for the tent. Tom, inspired by Aisha, volunteers for extra shifts, mentoring younger medics, his British snark replaced by humility. Dr. Levy, now Aisha's advocate, nominates her for a Red Cross leadership role, his gruff praise a constant, "Carter's the standard now." Back in Chicago, Aisha speaks at a medical conference, her scrub swapped for a blazer, her medal pinned to her chest, her voice a call to action. "We don't just heal bodies," she says, her eyes sweeping the crowd, "we heal divides, but only if we see each other." The Chicago Tribune covers her speech, its photos, Aisha with her medal, Tel Aviv's rubble, sparking a hospital fund for black medics in war zones, named Carter's Call. Miriam, visiting Chicago on exchange, joins her, sharing Tel Aviv's story at churches, her Hebrew accent a bridge to Aisha's mission. Brennan, back home, attends a bias workshop, his letter to Aisha pinned to his fridge, a daily reminder of his debt. Tel Aviv rebuilds, its clinics stronger, its aid teams diverse, Aisha's legacy a blueprint. Chicago's hospitals adopt her fund, training medics for crisis zones, while the Times article inspires a UN health equity panel, Aisha its keynote. She returns to her ER, her medal in a drawer, her focus on patients, her heart full of Tel Aviv's lessons. Richmond's story wasn't just hers, it was every medic told they don't belong, every voice rising above hate to heal. This is what happens when grit meets grace, when a black medic's skill outshines bias. Aisha didn't just save lives, she saved a team, a city, a hope for peace. So, what about you? Have you faced hate and risen, or seen someone heal through courage? Share your story in the comments, I'm reading every one. If Aisha's fight lit a fire in you, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Let's keep building a world where every medic's a hero, and every wound finds healing.